Ah, the Victorian era. A time when Queen Victoria reigned supreme. Ladies and gentlemen were anything but modern, and their homes, as it turns out, were just a little bit pongy. Imagine a world where air fresheners were as mythical as unicorns. Welcome, my dream-dripping listener, to a place where the phrase, "smells like home," might not quite be the compliment it is today. Picture it. You walk into a quintessential Victorian home, and your senses are bombarded, not with the fresh scent of lavender sachets or a gentle whisk of lemon polish, but with the robust and spicy aroma of, well, let's call it living history. Yes, in an age where plumbing was emerging technology and air circulation was more aspirational than actual, Victorian homes held onto their smells like treasured family heirlooms. It's an era where the building itself seemed to sigh. Why must I constantly be infused with the scent of boiled cabbage? But don't worry. These were not maladaptive homes. They were homes that told stories through their peculiar bouquets. For starters, let's talk a bit about sanitation, or the remarkable lack thereof. Indoor plumbing was still, shall we say, coming into its own. Chamber pots? Consider them the chic choice for the discerning Victorian's nocturnal needs. Just place it delicately under your lavish four-poster and let it rest until morning, when it would be discreetly whisked away to join its fragrant comrades in the alley. Then there was the delicate art of street drainage, ever capricious and often rebellious. Picture the streets as a kind of impromptu aromatic water feature, where rain carried a cocktail of spontaneous scents right up to your door, sometimes taking it further. Perhaps infiltrating your kitchen garden with eau de horse, or an unexpected hint of human. At times it was a neighborhood potluck of odors, if you will. Now do take a comfortable breath, though perhaps not too deep, and think about heat. Victorian homes did not boast modern thermostats capable of transforming chilly drafts into cozy warmth. Instead, they relied on the indulgence of coal fires. Coal, the misunderstood perfume of the century. It filled rooms not only with warmth, but an earthy essence that lovingly clung to every fabric. Why does everything smell like a steam train, you might ask? That's just the comforting embrace of the era's very own olfactory ambassador. And speaking of comforting, how could we forget the distinct gift of fashion? Layers upon layers of fabric, cloaking bodies very much in the business of being, well, human. Washing clothes was not a frequent pastime. No, laundry was less of a chore, and more of a semi-annual event marked by camaraderie and the pungent flutter of drying linens that might, if one was lucky, smell like yesterday's sunshine rather than 6 months of perspiration. And yet, amidst all these nasal novelties, there was a certain charm, an authentic portrait of a time less sanitized but equally rich in character. Smells were stories, postcards of the places and people that inhabited those spaces. I'll ease this musky journey to a soft pause here, like the last ember in a cozy fireplace flickering away, just waiting to lull you deeper into a serene slumber. If these stories help you drift off, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world to me. And before you fully fade into dreamland, I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Relax now as sepia-toned dreams beckon, and let your imagination wander through this fragrant tapestry stitched with history's humor. Who knows where our tale will waft next? As whispers of mist meandered through the dimly lit corners of Victorian parlors, let us drift into the mysteries of the age when homes weren't merely about four walls and a roof, but a cacophony of sensory surprises. The Victorian era, a time of opulence and bewilderment, where everything seemed draped in layers of velvet and the air hung thick with shades of mahogany and intrigue. But beneath this lavish surface was a tale of peculiar odors that could singe the most stalwart of noses, a history often forgotten by the senses. Imagine, if you will, stepping into a grand Victorian hallway, greeted not by the fresh pine of a countryside breeze or the delicate perfume of a rose, but rather by a more robust bouquet, the scent of boiled cabbage lingering like a nostalgic promise, mingling with hints of coal and the irresistible aroma of unwashed socks. This savoury melange was a direct consequence of the coal-fueled hearths that belched smoky sighs into every available nook. Ah, the joys of industrial progress. In this dimly lit world, carpets were considered the height of domestic sophistication. Imagine sprawling expanses of woven tapestries as colourful as a Dickens novel, each fibre imbued with stories of countless footsteps pressed into their plush depths. Yet, hidden within these threads was the silent villain of the Victorian home, a veritable Eden for dust mites and other microscopic tenants ever so willing to share their microdramas. The household drapes would contribute their fair share to this aromatic tapestry, absorbing sooty residues with the enthusiasm of freshly laundered sponges set loose in a mud puddle. Victorian kitchens were both an architectural marvel and a sensory theatre. Here, cauldrons of delight or dread bubbled away with the kind of fervour you'd only expect from an over-affectionate grandmother insisting upon a third helping. But among these culinary wonders, the spices of imperial ambitions collided with less than refrigerated leftovers, creating a symphony of scents that could curl even the stiffest of Victorian moustaches. It wasn't uncommon for a stroll past the pantry to offer a waft of dried herring, conversing intimately with a ripe cheddar, creating an olfactory duet not for the faint of heart. The heart of every Victorian home was the water closet, or what you modern aficionados might call the bathroom. These sanctuaries were privy to the true test of one's fortitude. Often tucked snugly off the kitchen for reasons only known to misguided architectural prowess, they presented their own unique challenges. Running water, a luxury that trickled in far too late into the era, left most with chamber pots hiding under voluminous skirts of modesty. And thus, nighttime expeditions were accompanied by silent prayers for balance and a steadfast constitution. External remedies offered little respite. Opening windows often invited the less than welcome embrace of London's infamous fog, a murky embrace more akin to inhaling a damp wool coat misted with eau d'industrial. These outdoor fragrances, carried into homes on the coattails of coal and horse-drawn contraptions, were yet another embellishment in the aromatic canvas of Victorian domiciles. Yet, amidst this bold ballet of smells, bedecked in all their historical glory, lay the undeniable charm of Victorian sensibility. Here, guests were entertained with the theatrical flair, accessible only to those who were unfazed by the harsh realities of domesticity. Parlours became stages, with the subtle scent of pipe smoke wafting through conversations, adding a dash of worldly air as family tales unfurled like a well-thumbed book. So, dear listener, as you nestle down further into your slumbering cocoon, perhaps envision yourself to be a guest in this lavish, if slightly pungent past, an era where senses were tested and the comforts of modern living were but a dream barely visible through the fog. Let history warm your senses as you drift gently into dreams, where the past quietly breathes beside you in shades of sepia. And as you float towards the next chapter, imagine the night-muted whispers of ink and quill discussing secrets across Victorian desks, waiting for the morning light. In a Victorian home, where love hung in the air along with a mysterious medley of curious scents, one might find oneself transported back in time, weaving through the intricate dance of a house's daily life. Victorian homes, seemingly ornate shells of brick and stone, were true champions in the age-old quest of possessing distinct aromas that could rattle any visitor's olfactory senses like a plucky sea shanty tune. Picture, if you will, a grand yet intimate Victorian parlour, bedecked in a mismatched bounty of furnishings. In one corner, a collection of fossil-filled curio cabinets held witness to dust bunnies waging tiny battles with air currents unknown to the modern home. It's fascinating to think of how readily these homes gathered dust, unimaginably thick, rich with tales of homespun adventures. In this peculiar setting, under the benevolent gaze of Queen Victoria herself, the Victorian approach to cleanliness was marred by few simple truths. Namely, bathing was often a semi-annual treat, akin to a birthday or a friendly ghost visit. It was a time of lavender-scented mustiness, where even the soapiest ambitions were thwarted by obtuse Victorian understanding. As merriment lingers through our mythical parlour, one would also notice the overwhelming embrace of the coal smell, quietly decorating the air and whispering hushed lullabies of industry. Coal fires were not just the trusted centerpiece of every room. They were the grand orchestrators, presiding over an airborne symphony of charcoal undertones. On a particularly robust day, that was only outshone by the aromatic prancing of roast mutton, mingling delightfully with the scent of last night's boiled cabbage, Victorian cuisine deserves its own chapter, or perhaps a novel, of comical gastronomic missteps. Suffice to say, it was curated for maximum olfactory impact. Allow your nostrils a moment's respite as we slip through a time-worn door into a modest yet spirited kitchen. This was the heart of the home, where ambitious bread loaves puffed with pride and simmering stews engaged in epic aroma contests. The Victorian kitchen, unacquainted with our modern fans and vents, jealously held on to its roasted, charred, boiled and burnt personalities, mingling them into a bouquet that was nothing short of alchemical. Yet beyond coal and cooking, it was the Victorian plumbing, or shall we say often the lack thereof, that orchestrated an olfactory opera all its own. Whispers of waste likely captured in the webs of rudimentary sewage systems lingered through these homes like ghosts reluctant to move on. It was an era graced by water closets that dared to challenge conventions at inopportune times, making quite the splash in family gatherings. As a compelling corner act, the pungent perfumes and tonics from the family physician's favoured apothecary shelves delighted noses too brave to ignore them. But let us not forget the loftier scents that hovered overhead, finding refuge in attic sanctuaries where lavender sachets mingled with the softly sweet decay of past fashion seasons. An amateur naturalist might discover this floral evolution in the quiet recesses of forgotten dresses and linen gowns, yearning for revival, or at the very least, a breath of fresh air. Finally, as daylight begins to wane, so does our chapter on the fragrant adventures within Victorian homes. The cozy embrace of these aromatic abodes quietly retreats into the gentle arms of twilight, assembling their scents for another day. As coal embers grow dim and the prevailing scent of time-honored dust settles with grace, we too take our leave, at least for the moment. Lean back gently into the welcoming hush of history's embrace as we pave the way to yet another tale in our continued exploration of peculiar, bygone mysteries. Rest now, dear listener, as the echoes of Victorian aromas playfully prance away, leaving a dreamy promise of further adventures and quieter companions in the chapters yet to unfold. Ah, the Victorian era, a time of high society, extravagant, and with fashion, and, if truth be told, odours that could make even the mightiest chimney sweep reconsider his life choices. Picture a street lined with opulent townhouses, their Gothic facades exuding an air of grandeur. Beneath this veneer, however, lurked a scented cacophony so potent it could challenge the bravest of olfactory senses. You see, dear listener, the Victorians were quite the eccentric bunch when it came to interior design and personal hygiene, and their homes were as much an exhibition of their wealth as a repository for pungent possibilities. With the Industrial Revolution raging in full swing, they embraced new technologies with open arms and perhaps pinched nostrils. Now, let us tiptoe into the heart of a Victorian abode, where the parlour room awaits, filled not only with doilies, antimacassars, and bric-a-brac, but also with the lingering aroma of coal smoke, courtesy of the fireplace's heroic struggle to heat the cavernous space. Coal, the black gold of the Victorian era, had the unfortunate side effect of leaving a sooty talisman on everything it touched, including the air. But wait, there's more. Our olfactory odyssey doesn't end here. As we glide down the hallway, the comforting scent of boiled cabbage and mutton stew drifts from the kitchen. Repetition breeds familiarity, and the humble cabbage was a staple in many Victorian meals, prized for its inexpensiveness and robust ability to remind anyone entering the home of yesterday's dinner. In addition to questionable culinary choices, the Victorian period was the heyday of peculiar home remedies and hygiene habits. Rising to the occasion was the eau de cologne, a liberally applied masking agent which, rather than vanquishing personal odors, often waged fruitless war with them, resulting in a thoroughly confused blend of floral, citrus, and cryptic undertones. As we amble further, we chance upon the washroom, a throne room of sorts, or at least it would be if it were within its own confines. It's here we meet the pièce de résistance of Victorian ingenuity, the outdoor privy, an architectural marvel by sheer determination, often standing at a rather inconvenient distance in the chilly embrace of the garden. Imagine scampering there during a midnight downpour with naught but a flickering candle and a strong sense of resolve. But fear not. Indoor plumbing was steadily improving, albeit reluctantly. But until then, hand basins with slop buckets ruled the day. Beyond the privy lies yet another, more fragrant revelation, the perfume of livelihoods, for homes were not just places for living, but for the interplay of vocation and avocation. If you found yourself dwelling next door to a tanner, soap maker, or even an ammonia-loving hatter, you were privy to a communal aroma that no amount of lace curtain could contain. Let us not forget the bedecked drawing rooms, where guests were entertained amidst the regal sillage of 1,000 unwashed feet cloaked by lavender sachets, a bouquet that lingered long after tea had been served. Tokens of social afternoons spent with garments polished with stale sweat, woolen devotion veiled airily by rosewater and camphor. But wasn't this half the charm? The subtle, or not so subtle bouquet, hidden beneath crinoline and curios, offering a rich tapestry woven with patience and a hint of mothballs. And so we leave this dense tapestry of scents, woven with the peculiarities of Victorian living. Remember, dear listener, that the Victorian knack for industry and invention stretched as far as it could to their noses and beyond. Our historical ramble draws a breath, ready to lead us yet deeper into the cozy labyrinth, and perhaps reveal new secrets that linger in the tapestry of time. With perfumes of the past gently fading into the night, our journey awaits another step ahead, where stories of days gone by continue to reveal their mischievous charms. So, rest your eyes as you ponder the peculiarities of Victorian life, and let the aroma of curiosity draw us ever onward. In the dreamlike dimness of Victorian London, where gas lamps whisper their softest glow onto cobblestone streets, a peculiar aroma wafts through the evening air. It is a scent so intricate and pervasive, it deserves its own sonnet, had the noses of the poets not been too overwhelmed to compose one. Let us wander into the elegance and olfactory enigmas of a middle-class Victorian dining room, where social etiquette brushed elbows with what could only be described as an open conspiracy against pleasant scents. Imagine a grand table, draped in a white cloth that has seen better days. Layer upon layer of lace accents speak of sophistication, while subtly masking the inevitable stains like a wise but weary smile in a family portrait. The walls bear ornaments that whisper tales of international adventures often embarked upon solely by these illustrious knickknacks. There is an anticipation of an evening well spent, although reality might lean a whisper in the direction of olfactory offense. A dinner party is set to unfold, the guests mingling, eagerly ready to feast not just on food, but on conversation flavored with the rich tapestry of gossip and politeness. As servants discreetly shuffle about, the roomful of soon-to-be diners is oblivious to the silent waltz of odors preparing to perform their olfactory symphony. And what a culinary concerto it promises to be. The centerpiece is a robust joint of mutton, steaming heartily on the table and oozing authenticity, if not entirely pleasant aromas. The Victorians, you see, possessed a palate tolerant to what modern diners might label as adventurous. Meats were often cooked to commemorate special occasions, or more likely, to give every prized microbial inhabitant of the kitchen a run for its money. But the true star performer here is not the mutton on center stage. Nay, it is the sweet, lingering duet sung by cabbage and coal, a melody that evoked both nostalgia and the fervent hope that the next course would arrive swiftly. Coal fires, essential for their warmth, also doubled as enthusiastic distributors of sooty scents. Cabbage, a trusted compatriot of the Victorian repertoire, carried its distinct fragrance with unapologetic vigor, lingering like a distant relative, overstaying their welcome. The final act of this sensory play was conducted by the unsung heroes of hygiene, chamber pots. These quiet custodians of Victorian practicality ensured that any lingering olfactory pleasantries were quickly expelled in favor of a more authentic domestic bouquet. You see, the construction of bathrooms was an architectural quirk not keenly embraced until much later epochs, and the humble chamber pot played its part as both fixture and fragrance artisan. It's in this very setting that our optimistic hosts engage in cheerful banter, their cheerful spirits unfazed by the waves of aromas that roll over their parlor, as if reliving the tides of their seaside holidays. Tea makes its entrance in this aromatic opera, an Earl Grey symphony striking a delicate balance between solace and forgetfulness. Throughout the evening, gloved hands and gloved hearts meet with charming indifference to the symphony of smells around them, each sniff a silent nod to perseverance, each chuckle a testament to the wonderful complexity of Victorian hospitality. The air grows heavy with laughter, and perhaps a hint of lavender in an ambitious attempt to soften the corners of this fragrant realm. As the guests drift into post-prandial chatters, it becomes excruciatingly clear that despite the plethora of sophisticated social dance steps, there remains a robust tolerance for the less pleasant olfactory steps, a dance that continues quietly as the footsteps slowly exit from kernel to kernel of conversation, leaving behind only the echoes of laughter and perhaps the ghost of a cabbage past. Oh, but smell not whether the odor-infused world will remain so, for as the dimming lanterns gently signal a close to one dinner party, the eternal quest for cleaner air spirals on, quietly approaching innovations that promise to perfume the future with sweeter possibilities and the lightest touch of roses. And there, in the comforting shadows of the night, as dreams begin to weave their whispered tales on the threads of scented breezes, we find ourselves poised to unlock even more of the Victorian mystery's essence, beckoning us with a knowing nod towards what awaits in the cobwebbed corners of history. Picture yourself tiptoeing into a Victorian home. The air is thick and perfumed with what one might generously call character. It's an elaborate ballet of essence, a pas de deux between mustiness and lavender, with a dollop of coal smoke for good measure. Hold your nose and flex your curiosity. For tonight, we embark on a snoozeful exploration of the Victorian wardrobe, a true trove of abodes gone aromatic in its own peculiar way. The Victorian closet was a wonderland of fabrics and furs tailored with the finest intentions and worn by women known for their waistlines as tight as their tenants' purses. If the rest of the Victorian home was a symphony of scents, the wardrobes were the overture, with every opening of the armoire releasing an olfactory chorus. Therein lurked the day's undergarments, a triumph of lace and longevity who stuck around longer than an uninvited dinner guest. Unwashed clothing was stowed away comfortably in a cacophonous alliance between sweat-stippled chemises and sturdy corsets. Our modern plight of overflowing laundry baskets pales in comparison to the Victorian tactic of washing one's entire wardrobe perhaps once or twice a year. Imagine, if you will, the bouquet of odors blossoming delicately like a bouquet of week-old flowers. Now, before we journey too far into the folds of Victorian fashion, let us pause to appreciate the perfume. The Victorians knew a thing or two about aroma, bless them. They believed the nose was the portal to the brain, and thus sought to dazzle it, or perhaps, more accurately, to carpet bomb it with delightful distractions. Enter, stage left, perfumes that smelled like they were concocted in alchemists' workshops. You see, Victorians harnessed the power of potent oils, lavender, to frighten away marauding stinks, and rose to tickle the senses into tranquility. Yet, like any good story, there was a trick lurking beneath the surface. Mother Nature herself held a prominent role in these collections with musk extracted from the anal glands of musk deer, a fact to ponder if you ever feel overly concerned about the origins of your artisanal deodorant. The Victorians had to be resourceful, turning to the animal kingdom in the search for olfactory opulence. Ambergris, with an illustrious past as a rare fixative, was often found washed ashore, courtesy of a sperm whale's digestive escapades. Delightful thoughts for when you're considering today's scent spritz decision. And then, as always, was the looming spectre of coal smoke, that fine enhancer of ambience, weaving its web throughout the home. Passing through chimney stacks, it would saunter down like a melancholy ghost, mingling ever so politely with that ambergris-hued wardrobe, or the staunch whiff of unyielding fabric dyes, creating with each breath an intimate olfactive gathering. On particularly adventurous evenings, you might detect the curious, à la mode, smell of rubber. For those Victorians who felt daringly modern, the rare rubber raincoat hung impatiently beside velvet capes and bonnets. Flexible, yet unforgiving, the level of sweat induced by such rainwear might have outweighed the inconvenience of getting caught in the rain itself. Thus, the wardrobe was a mixture of fashion triumphs and, well, lessons. Let's meanwhile not overlook the Mothball Club, an ensemble of chemical deterrents so aromatic their presence is felt even in millennial grandparent closets. It was a high-stakes game against winged munchers who viewed coat linings like a Michelin-starred menu. Victorian fashionistas bore their woolen allies with equivalent right of pride and olfactory resignation. With each thread we wove tonight, we've added to the illustrious tapestry of the Victorian scentscape, a complex symphony of life's extraordinariness and mundanity, wafting from every seam and stitch. One might almost envy the cat curling up close enough to inhale every last note, but for tonight, it is but a gentle lullaby as the story of our Victorian home continues to unfurl. Perhaps in the morrow, or during another chapter, we'll whisk through beleaguered kitchens or tin baths. Now, take a gentle breath, ideally one without the added zest of musk, and let us slide softly into the tales of what these Victorian halls yet keep hidden, awaiting the curious and the sleepy alike. Imagine yourself in the heart of a Victorian dining, our room, its grandiosity unquestionable, its aroma unmistakable. The air, thick with the scent of boiled mutton and overcooked cabbage mingling with the sweet hint of coal smoke, settled into the room like an uninvited guest that refused to leave. You see, dear listener, there was nothing quite like the olfactory stew concocted by a Victorian home, an unrivaled orchestra of scents that could perform a symphony of confusion upon the unprepared nose. As you visualize this scene in hues of sepia, it might help to understand that a great deal of Victorian interior fragrance could be attributed to housekeeping practices, or, more precisely, the enthusiastic yet scientifically questionable attempts at housekeeping. Ladies of the era believed that flinging open a window was akin to inviting a plague into your parlor. Thus, rather than embrace a crisp breeze, they opted to seal their homes tighter than a bank vault, securely trapping all manner of perfumes within. Now, lest we find ourselves lost in olfactory chaos, allow me to divert your attention to the Victorian penchant for wallpaper. Ah yes, wallpaper, the understated champion of dandies and duchesses alike. However, their chosen pastels and patterns were marred by a peculiar feature known as arsenic green. Delightfully verdant to the eye, yes, but it bore the unfortunate side effect of emanating a subtle fragrance of, well, fatality. You see, this wallpaper had a habit of releasing arsenic-laden fumes, giving new meaning to the phrase, suffering for beauty. Let us now tiptoe silently into the Victorian kitchen, a place of curious contradiction, a domain of culinary ambition and mysterious odors. Here, cooking was both art and alchemy, especially given the challenge of operating a coal-fired range. You may appreciate the drama of it, the roar of flames and crackle of coals. But mind you, the output of such theatrical magnificence could often linger in the air far longer than anticipated, stubbornly, embedded like a scent-based haunting. Amongst these aromatic adventures, one could never underestimate the contribution of the family cistern. Used for washing and the occasional, albeit reluctant, bathing ritual, these basins were often filled with water that had developed a personality over time, a personality best described as musty and slightly sardonic. And then, of course, the challenge of illumination came to the fore. Gaslighting was avant-garde, but held a tendency to leak. The resulting impact was a fragrant bouquet of coal, gas, and the undeniable sting of caution one must quickly grow accustomed to. Surely a heady mix to accompany an evening read of Dickens or a game of whist. The solution for many a parlor room dweller seeking escape from this pungent cacophony lay in a small, innocent bowl of potpourri. These floral concoctions stashed in elegant bowls weren't just fragrant decoration, they were desperately hopeful contestants in an unwinnable scented battle. Still, even in defeat, their presence offered a whiff of solace for the beleaguered nose, an acknowledgement that hope, like lavender, could sometimes persist against all odds. With such an array of sensory offerings, you may wonder how on earth anyone found the serenity to sleep. Perhaps it was a matter of adaptation, or an unspoken agreement between individuals and their communal air to coexist without too much complaint. After all, a day in Victorian life was rather taxing. If the scents didn't wear you out, surely the corsets and stiff collars would finish the job. Peering through the lace curtains of history, we see that peculiar intermingling of aromas was not merely a series of unfortunate accidents. It was a complex tapestry of everyday life, woven with bizarre beauty and unintended comedy. And as we drift quietly away from today's exploration, imagine yourself cozy in your own bed, emboldened to embrace whatever peculiarities tomorrow's chapter may bring, lest our journey into the fragrant world of Victorian homes leaves you eager for yet another historical snooze. In the haze of the dimly lit Victorian streets, where gas lamps flickered like sleepy fireflies and horse-drawn carriages clattered over cobbled stones, we find ourselves amidst a rather peculiar societal quirk, the curious case of the great Victorian odour. Now, if you've ever wondered why Victorian homes seemed like an olfactory assault, more nose than rose, then settle in, fluff your pillow, and prepare for a gentle stroll through nostril history. As you drift back into time, picture this. It's the year 1852, and you're invited to the finest parlours of London. You enter through robust oak doors, greeted not by the comforting aroma of a lavender sachet, but an unexpected tidal wave of mingling scents. The Victorian home was a tapestry of odours, woven with the pungent threads of coal fires, damp wool, and a hint of eau de chambre pot. Quite the welcome. Ah yes, coal, dubbed King of the Siamese sooty kingdom. It was as quintessential to Victorian households as the stiff upper lip was to its people. Coal-fired stoves heated homes with efficiency, and by efficiency, I mean that the soot clung to every surface with the tenacity of a Victorian aunt clinging to propriety. This resulted in an omnipresent odour resembling a retired steam engine wrapped in a velvet curtain. What fun! But wait, there's more. Enter the enigmatic allure of damp wool. Victorian fashion was nothing if not dramatic. Layers upon layers of woolen attire turned every home into a makeshift greenhouse of humidity and sweat, even on the best of British summer days. The wool, absorbing moisture like a sponge with very low self-esteem, would emanate a smell akin to wet dog, which seemed to permanently blend with homemade soaps that often lacked in their fundamental objective: cleanliness. And then, dear listener, there was the pièce de résistance, the chamber pot. To manage nightly needs, Victorians relied on these porcelain inventions strategically positioned under beds for convenience. It was all the rage. Imagine midnight, the sound of gentle rain against the window, and the mature aroma of ammonia wafting through the air, a symphony of wincing nostrils. One cannot dismiss the medicinal bouquet gracing Victorian homes. The period was awash with holistic remedies, tinctures stored snugly in glass bottles lining mahogany shelves, ready to cure ailments both real and imagined. These concoctions often contained opium, syrups, or powdered rhinoceros horn for the adventurous souls, and carried a scent that suggested the immediate proximity of a very, very confused apothecary. And let's not forget about the kitchens, where meals prepared with love and fear included dishes like jellied eels and boiled calves' feet. Culinary adventurers of the era exercised the preparedness of a guinea pig traversing a precarious plank of taste and olfactory abundance. Kitchens were indeed the wonky epicenter of fragrances, sometimes prompting hurried retreats more than congenial gatherings. In the silent depths of night, when all the aforementioned elements melded into one unified fragrance, it could almost be called home. Victorians persevered through these aromatic adventures with the fortitude of the magnesium-lit lamps illuminating their sepia-toned lives. So, as you softly surrender to the sweet embrace of sleep, remember that, whether by design or delightfully accidental mishap, the great Victorian odor was as much a character of the era as the lingering notes of lavender tucked away in a long-forgotten drawer. Awaiting us in our next nostalgic slumber sits another secret of sloppy sanitation marvels, only slightly more fragrant than our current tale. For now, let the gentle whispers of history wrap around you like a warming woolen shawl as you drift into dreams of days long past. Imagine, if you will, a winding street blanketed in the gentle embrace of Victorian fog, where gas lamps stand as sentinels of light against the gloomy facade of tightly packed row houses. Those very houses contain an aristocracy of nuisances, not the least of which were odors so potent they could have inspired a new wave of perfumers. Yet, snuggled under layers of comforters, we must explore the causes behind these pungent aromas that would make a week-old cheese blush. You see, the Victorian household wasn't just vertically challenged, it was also rich in surprises. One such surprise surged forth from an unsuspecting source: the kitchen. The Victorian kitchen, a bastion of culinary ambitions that could send any modern chef into a dreaming frenzy of confusion. Here, everything from mutton to marrow jelly marinated in an olfactory cloud. Stews simmered to tantalize taste buds, but were equally successful at radiating fragrances that clung to every curtain and cushion like an affectionate, albeit unwanted ghost. The oddest culprit in this aromatic alchemy was none other than the stovetop custard, a favorite dessert among Victorian families. For reasons unbeknownst to the modern palate, the Victorians enjoyed their custards heavily spiced and uniquely savory. Imagine merging the robust scent profiles of cardamom, nutmeg, and, dare I say it, a hint of cabbage, and you must accept that Victorian vanilla was truly an acquired taste. This was a world where desserts required an adventurous spirit and perhaps an exploratory digestive system. Meanwhile, the sanitation of the day was a mere suggestion at best. Enter the chamber pot, a majestic porcelain fixture of practicality, renowned for its stellar ability to contain a staggering array of untold stories. Emptied at whimsically inconsistent intervals, these pots were experts in reception but not in farewell, and the mischief they wrought upon noses during hot summer nights remains eternally legendary. To handle them required the finesse of a seasoned sailor aboard a particularly raucous ship, except here the cargo was considerably less dignified. Yet, not all victors of vintage odor hailed from inorganic origins. The Victorian age saw the advent of the coal-fueled miracle known as the indoor heating system. Alas, for many homeowners and boarders, these heaters doubled as conduits to the sooty underbelly of flue-blocked chaos. A fire might burn brightly, but its due diligence involved ensuring every piece of attire retained a decorous sprinkle of soot, a modest price for survival, or perhaps sartorial sabotage. Speaking of attire, it is here we must face the textiles that caressed Victorian skin without quite soothing the senses. Woolen garments, if morality allowed, could aptly serve dual roles as sheep impersonators when wet. A rainy stroll might bestow an earthy, aromatic souvenir that lingered endlessly. a constant reminder of their meteorological misjudgment. However, the true perpetrators of persistent perfume arose from an unassuming component: plumbing. Oh, the Victorian plumbing, a system known less for its efficiency than for completing its duties with a generosity of spirit, often heralding its achievements with geyser-like enthusiasm. Indoor plumbing of this era could announce a day's work louder than any town crier, a punctual ending point to daily ablutions accompanied by fanfares of forgotten toiletries. A quaint amalgamation of hissing pipes and clanging radiators serenaded Victorian abodes like a nocturnal symphony. These orchestras, paired with ubiquitous fumes, set the stage for evenings infused with unique ambience, or should I say, effervescence. After all, the only thing craftier than a Victorian aroma was the person who managed to pretend it wasn't there. As we tenderly bid adieu to these aromatic escapades, our journey carries on into the glittering age of gas lamps. But before we wander further, allow the whirlpool of scents past to lull you into a dream-filled slumber where potential new chapters may yet be mingled with memories of yesterday's fragrances, assuredly from a time when one's sense of smell was both penance and prize. Picture a sprawling Victorian manor nestled comfortably under a canopy of stars, its intricately designed gables casting playful shadows in the silvery moonlight. Now, think of that same manor in the light of day, with its grand facade and whimsical turrets, and permit yourself the faintest chuckle, for its pristine exterior masks an odoriferous tale waiting to waft its way into your dreams. You see, while Victorian homes epitomized architectural splendor, much like a show horse bedecked in ribbons, what lay beneath those polished exteriors often needed a tad more perfume. Our adventures tonight take us into the opulent world of lavender-scented sitting rooms, where fainting couches were the height of sophisticated decor, and the air, as clear as a foggy London morn, told a rather pungent tale. In those days, indoor plumbing was as much a rare find as a hen's tooth. Imagine, if you will, aristocrats clad in their fineries, engaging in the daily dance between dignity and discomfort, all while their water closets remained but a distant, wishful thinking. Most homes relied on chamber pots, those simple vessels placed discreetly under beds, which played their part in an olfactory symphony, often conducted without consent of the nose. The grandeur of Victorian architecture extended also to its kitchens, rooms of bustling activity powered by blundering coal-fired ranges. Kitchens, then, were a crucible of culinary creativity and chaotic conflagrations, where the enticing aroma of a bubbling stew wrestled vigorously with the pervasive tang of soot and not-so-distant echoes of yesterday's fish. It was the sort of bouquet that would send today's culinary snobs scuttling for their freshly ground espresso. Treading gently up the staircase, we find ourselves entering the genteel bedrooms where inhabitants lay, nestled in feather-stuffed sheets after a long day. While Victorian beds might seem lush and inviting, the very feather-stuffed nature added to the scent safari. Plumes pilfered from fowls retain their rustic barnyard essence, giving the phrase "sleep like a log" a new, fragrant meaning. Reaching the nursery, the bewildered observer might assume a toddler detective had gone through a bottle of eau de vieux fromage. Parents endeavored to mask the effluvia with pomanders of extraordinary ambition, crafting posies with a proficiency that would put Shakespeare's Ophelia to shame. Venturing through the hallways, one finds walls adorned with plush velvet drapes, acting as both ostentatious symbols of wealth and unwitting traps for every manner of malodorous jest that the building had to offer. And yet, these reminders of what was socially revered lent a bizarre charm, as insulating as a favorite childhood blanket, albeit one closer in scent to a slightly overripe cheese. But oh, the parlors! Those verdant theatres where society poured pensively at the scandal du jour, layering it with a healthy patina of eau de la Cologne. Here, the swirling sampler of perfumes met the oily embers of the coal fireplaces, crafting an atmosphere that both entertained the senses and occasionally panicked them. Yet, amidst the wade through this aromatic history, is a gentle reminder of the resilience of human spirit. finding humor in demanding environments. Residents with a stiff upper lip often faced these olfactory adventures by creating concoctions of dried herbs and lavender, offering a therapeutic and sleepy retreat from their day's end. Such moments reminded them that the true essence of home was not merely the freehold banners it flew, nor the casual air of grandiosity the architecture pretended, but rather the comforting familiarity that let them laugh at its imperfections and drift softly into dreams. Now, as you let your eyes drift shut, imagine those sounds of chattering fireplaces and rustling satins echoing through sleepy corridors. It's here we pause, as a feather pillow gently cradles you deeper into slumber, preparing to turn the next page of this soft, winding story in the dim, flickering candlelight of the Victorian era, when shadows danced like waltzing aristocrats along wallpapered halls. The olfactory landscape was more of a cacophony than a symphony. You see, the Victorian age was as much about grand design as it was about bewildering smells, each layer unfolding with the peculiar allure of a night at the opera. Let us tiptoe into the heart of a Victorian kitchen, the true epicenter of aromatic intrigue. Here, the scent menu was an ambitious melange. Imagine the robust aroma of coal mingling with the ghostly presence of cabbage that somehow seemed to linger overnight, attending every breakfast uninvited like a third wheel at a couple's table. Layer upon that the smoky embrace of yesterday's bacon still clinging to the air like a memory of a particularly greasy rendezvous. Indeed, the hearth was the soul of the home, but despite its central role, it was equipped with ventilation that would generously be described as selective. A dainty puff of smoke from the chimney was more a suggestion than reassurance that an exodus had been made. Thus, while warmth was contained, so too was every stubborn scent, refusing to part with the comfort of acquaintance. Yet, it wasn't just the kitchen contributing to this olfactory jamboree. From the coal-smeared parlors to the dusty drawing rooms crammed with bric-a-brac, each Victorian chamber had its distinctive perfume. The era's deep affection for heavy draperies and ornate rugs turned them into glorified sponges for smoke and soot. They would eagerly latch onto any lusty scent, turning homes into olfactory time capsules. It's said that stepping into a Victorian parlor was akin to diving nose first into a historical potpourri of the mundane. Even the bathrooms, or rather, their more primitive Victorian equivalents, those charmingly simple chamber pots, had roles in this aromatic ensemble. Modern plumbing was a luxury that many a Victorian home did without, leading to an interesting relationship between the daily house activities and water closets, or lack thereof. The midnight excursions to relieve oneself included not a small degree of bravery as you maneuvered the halls like a silent, odor-dodging detective. And while today we enjoy the carefree freshness of factory-sealed bleach tablets, the Victorians engaged in the far more exotic art of concealment. They masked these scents with omens of floral hope, tucking lavender sachets under every pillow and using scented vinegar, as if trying to convince their noses that all was indeed merry and bright. But outside the home, the streets carried their own fragrant adventures. Picture horse-drawn carriages, their former cargo leaving gifts in the form of odorous road adornments. The gentle clinking of horseshoes was accompanied by the sound, if one were to enhance this sleep story for audio accuracy, of soft blobs meeting cobblestones, much to the irritation of anyone not watching their step. And let us not overlook the fashion of the time, corsets that hugged tight against woolen dresses, encouraging perspiration and trapping more than waist size beneath those extravagant silk layers. By the time one strutted home from a day on the town, the ensemble of scents one person could collect resembled Victorian cookbooks, complex layering, minus any semblance of culinary delight. Yet we mustn't judge too harshly, dear dreamer, for these aromas and absurdities were but the background music to an age vibrant with human endeavor, come dance and scientific discovery alike. Indeed, they write a scented love letter to the quirks of an era that sought beauty in layers and found it in unexpected places. even if some politely contested the definition of beauty itself. Now, as the aromas of this vivid past begin to fade from our storytelling scene, allow your senses to gently rest, preparing for their next venture into the curious Victorian world, where the magnificently odd never quite sleeps. As the sleepy fog of calamity loomed lower in the Victorian era, one might wonder what precisely filled those grand homes with such a peculiar bouquet, enough to make even the hardiest nose twitch in curiosity, or most likely sheer self-preservation. Picture yourself, dear listener, stepping into a grand parlor of an 1850s townhouse. You are greeted not by the gentle scent of scones or some quaint, lavender-infused air, but rather an aroma that suggests 100 pigs might be hiding within the wallpaper. Why, you may ask? It's all thanks to the curious workings of 19th century indoor plumbing, or, as they charmingly referred to it, the Great Stink. Imagine the excitement of the well-to-do Victorians as they welcomed indoor sanitation. Unfortunately, this modern convenience came with a retrograde partner, a plumbing system stuck somewhere in prehistory. But fear not, the pipes may have been leaky, and the water closets, enigmatic puzzles of brass and porcelain, operating with the reliability of a mischievous ghost, frequently lured their users into a perilous dance of near drowning and unease. The crowning achievement of these homes, however, was, without a doubt, the presence of the great Victorian cesspit. Knowingly designed to be clandestinely enticing, these charming caverns of effluent were strategically positioned just beneath the drawing rooms of prestige. In a genius stroke of architectural oversight, they tended to be poorly ventilated and prone to flooding, a feature perhaps believed to add a perverse degree of excitement to London high society luncheons. If Victorian homes were to be given an olfactory orchestra, it would be conducted by the famed night soil men, labourers, whose late-night duties involved unceremoniously hauling away the contents of these pits. Envision them, under the cover of night, navigating cobblestone streets with cartloads of what can elegantly be termed ambassadors of aroma. In an era when public gatherings were as common indoors as outdoors, such jobs were performed with utmost discretion, or as much as discretion can be maintained atop a cartful of olfactory offence. As you drift into a deeper exploration of their world, imagine, if you will, the societal horror that emerged with something as simple as a strong breeze. A mere gust casting its aromatic mischief from the Thames, renowned for its distinctively aromatic constitution, could cause more hearts to flutter than a Shakespearean sonnet. Then there were the domestic experiments. The lives lived in symphony with strange concoctions that promised fresh air but often delivered quite the opposite. Home remedies involved burning fragrant resins, herbs, and even exotic spices in attempts to ward off the odoriferous gremlin that haunted their halls. Lemons and rosemary would have done very well in the kitchen, but alas, their noble acts to perfume the living room often failed, as if the ghosts of meals past whispered in strong protest. The gadgets, an inventor's fever dream, designed to freshen air, ranged from the moderately optimistic to the downright dangerous. A Victorian could derive undue satisfaction from their small chemical dispersing devices, squarely unaware they were turning Grandma's favourite draperies into a veritable museum of chemical residues. Even quite literally, dressing up bad smells had its day. Quirky garments embedded with variety sachets, pinned discreetly on the underdresses, wafted comforting notes of lavender or vanilla, albeit slightly offset by perspiration, coal dust, and the ever-looming backdrop of horse-dawn aroma from London streets. And yet, like the dauntless honeybee flitting from bloom to bloom, our dear Victorians persevered. Enhanced by a society all too willingly nose-blind, they praised sweet scents where few dared to find them, imagining whiffs of success amidst every indiscretion of scent. As evening's shadow gently slips over the manor, our thoughts turn dreamily onward. We'll leave the echoes of Victorian ingenuity wrapped quietly in the folds of time, tantalizingly hinting at the magical and at times whimsical complexities that lay ahead in our next adventure through the ages. Picture yourself meandering down a cobblestone street in Victorian London, The gas lamps cast a soft glow on the fog that twirls around like a mischievous sprite. Your mind, now heavy with drowsy warmth, drifts through this historical haze, accompanied by the soft patter of your own footsteps. As you draw closer to one of those iconic narrow townhouses, take a moment to admire its exterior, with intricate brickwork that mirrors the lace collar you'd find on a fine Victorian lady's dress. But don't be fooled. Beauty can often disguise a beastly odor. Step gently across the threshold and into the grand hallway, where chandeliers twinkle with a warm luminescence. Perhaps your nose wrinkles ever so slightly at the hint of something lingering in the air, because you've been transported not to a perfumery, but instead to a scene from Chapter 13 in our exploration of Victorian domestic life, one that will awaken your senses in the most unexpected of ways. Now, the Victorians were masters of many things: industry, literature, stiffly formal etiquette, and, unfortunately, retaining various, shall we say, unique aromatics within their abodes. Indeed, the fashion du jour was all about how to manage these odors, ideally with enough flair to distract Aunt Mildred from the fact that the parlor didn't quite smell like a garden of roses. You see, indoor plumbing was still a burgeoning novelty, where today we might expect the sound of water gurgling mischievously through copper pipes. The Victorians were often more familiar with the unexpected gush of a chamber pot being emptied into a convenient bucket. Yes, the Victorian home was a testament to human endurance, particularly when it came to the olfactory challenges of daily life. Nowhere was this more evident than in the kitchen. A positively exotic array of scents wafted through these spaces, culminating in a fragrant bouquet of boiled mutton, cabbage, and occasionally a charred attempt at the latest culinary innovation from the continent. Truly, the Victorian pursuit of cuisine was a daring adventure fraught with aromatic perils. To combat such robust air, households often resorted to the charming art of potpourri. Picture, if you will, fragrant bowls filled with dried orange peels, lavender sprigs, and spices, a veritable arsenal of delightful bits intended to wage war against malodorous foes. Of course, the effectiveness of potpourri depended greatly on its ability to hold out longer than the heady scent of yesterday's fish stew. And we mustn't forget the grand fireplaces, billowing coal smoke, in a spirited attempt to join the indoor air parade. These fireplaces were not only generators of warmth, they also infused homes with the scent of well-warmed bricks combined with just a hint of London soot, a special blend that hardly needed bottling. So, as you lounge upon a lavishly upholstered chaise, reminiscent of those gathered in Victorian parlours under layers of plush velvet, consider the paradox of the Victorian air freshener. These homeowners were equal parts artist and scientist, crafting ingenious blends of herbs and perfumes to mask the ripe effects of 19th century living. It was a way of giving guests the illusion of stepping into a space confident enough to disguise its true identity with the finest olfactory artifice. Let your senses now take you further onward, to yet another room, steeped in history and detail, where faint echoes of laughter mix with the sweet notes of a pianoforte. As the charming strains of a waltz begin to twinkle on the edge of your awareness, we'll continue this journey of gentle discovery, shuffling together through the corners of Victorian houses, where past scents and stories come together with age-old charm. Now, as we once again find ourselves meandering through the foggy lanes of Victorian England, we stumble upon yet another aromatic adventure. Ah, the Victorian home, a real treat for the senses, assuming your nose has a sense of humour. This time, let's snuggle into the peculiar truth behind the questionable olfactory experiences that turn these houses into unwitting aromatic exhibitions. Victorian homes were bastions of innovation, at least that's what they were aiming for. Now let's imagine, if you will, a lovely dining room in a charming terraced house. Polished mahogany furniture gleams warmly in the gaslight, creating an inviting atmosphere for the evening's genteel supper. But as the discerning guest approaches, they might catch a whiff of something less inviting. a garland of pungent surprises yet to be unwrapped. The flooring, often a proud tapestry of rich carpets, unbeknownst to the wearer of crinolines, was quite the accomplice in retaining odors. It was like velvety wallpaper for the floor, but had a productivity akin to a sponge, especially skilled at absorbing the thick cloud of soot from the coal fires. Very eco-friendly in nature, these carpets ensured every step carried an atmospheric memory with it. Yet, it wasn't just the floors that played host to aromatic revelry. The walls were a hidden treasure trove of various malodorous secrets. Thanks to the era's prized wallpaper, drenched in vivid greens and glamorous yellows, the air was enriched with the subtle tinge of arsenic. Yes, those pigments weren't just eye-catching. They were laced with enough toxicity to make home a bit hazardous to one's health. But worry not, only a minor aspect of a terribly fashionable lifestyle. The kitchen, the very heart of the home, pulsating with activity akin to an enthusiastic codfish display at market, was a special symphony of aromas. Everyday smells could be mistaken for a Dickensian stew, slowly brewed with a pinch of ash, a lace of coal smoke, and a dollop of mystery. Consider the appetizer of under-ventilated chimney smoke, wafting with the excitement of its permanency. Of course, one cannot possibly overlook the loo, or the lack thereof in some cases. For many Victorians, the task of visiting the restroom was akin to embarking on a leisurely excursion to the open-air facilities of the backyard outhouse. The euphemistic closet portion of the water closet might bring chuckles, but the real exhibition lay in the chamber pots, a polite, ceramic, nightly companion. These rather handy bathroom alternatives were notorious for their entrepreneurial ability to find a resting place under the bedroom bed, maintaining a nuanced, olfactory footprint in the comfort of one's boudoir. And then there's the matter of personal perfumes, or lack thereof. In the spirit of combining practicality with elegance, many Victorians trusted fresh air and all-purpose soap as their aromatic allies. Though, alas, their trusty sidekicks couldn't always outpace the natural fragrance of everyday Victorian pursuits. Be those pursuits the consequences of tightly packed, exuberantly heated dinner parties, or a brisk promenade down the occasionally fragrant Thames. Back in the bustling heart of the household, the smoking parlours reigned supreme. Victorians enjoyed their hours with a celebratory puff of the choicest tobacco. However, this serene retreat also offered the gentlemen of the house an aromatic bouquet of wax and tallow, courtesy of the dazzling waxed moustaches in attendance. Ah, the curious, ceaseless symphony of the Victorian house, a cohesive collection of scents ready to stimulate every sense except, perhaps, common sense. And in this quiet repose, as the heavy scent of history lulls us to rest, we turn a page gently, lest we wrinkle the finer nuances of this fragrant narrative. As the gaslight glows dim, a rustle and hush guide us softly to the next chapter, inviting dreams of even more adventures from this nose-tickling era. In the flickering haze of gas lamps and under the persistent veil of coal smoke, the Victorians found themselves embarking on a peculiar little adventure right inside their homes. Picture this: vast rooms cloaked in velvet curtains and overstuffed with furniture that seemed determined to prove that more was always better. In a Victorian house, nothing delighted as much as an overabundance, but this rule applied, unfortunately, even to odours. Step inside, and you'd be greeted first by the ever-present aroma of coal. Coal was the Victorian answer to just about everything: warmth, cooking, boiling water for a nice cup of afternoon tea, and, paradoxically, cleaning, since it created a layer of soot over everything. Victorian homeowners were known for their irony after all, only they would clean the parlour using a process that involved dusting off mountains of coal ash while swishing through the house in fine layers of lace. As the coal fires burned merrily, likely a euphemism, since merrily wouldn't quite describe the wheezy clouds of soot clogging one's nose, they added a pungent layer to the bouquet of scents marinating the home. These would hang lovingly in the air, and every curtain, rug, and cravat, as though determined to leave an olfactory legacy. Moving into the kitchens, where layers of cooked cabbage and boiled mutton intermingled with yesterday's fish dish, The air grew thicker still. Meal odors didn't just whisper, they yelled, associating themselves with everything nearby, latching onto wallpaper and loved ones alike. Suddenly, Aunt Mildred and the wallpaper shared an uncanny resemblance, though one hoped only in scent, and not in fabric choice. Of course, this tapestry of aroma needed company, which it found in the form of chamber pots and the ubiquitous outdoor privies. In a world before indoor plumbing became standard, a chamber pot sat apologetically beneath every bed, adding its own je ne sais quoi to a room's atmosphere. There's an argument that nothing quite bonds a family together like sharing such elements of daily life, though it's safe to assume nobody missed this particular tradition when apartment bathrooms came into vogue. Up in the attics, one would think a scent meant escape. Instead, a fresh encounter awaited with the long-forgotten relics encased in the heavy scent of mothballs, a small deterrent that attempted, valiantly if futilely, to civilize the untamed wilderness of disintegrating family heirlooms. Grandfather's old hunting trophy, a pungent herbal experience, Great-Aunt Agatha's Victorian frock collection, an olfactory archaeological dig. Lest we forget, the Victorians' famed affection for cleanliness extended beyond themselves right to their pets, those lucky cats and dogs who wandered around wearing the very perfumes of their owners. A communal scent, if you will, adding a dash of vitality to the otherwise characteristically Victorian assemblage of miasma. For those brave souls who ventured outdoors, relief was only relative, embracing the city's artistic showcase of aromas, horse-drawn carriages leading, and the accompanying fragrance lagging only slightly behind. It was a bit like an orchestra played by a one-man band whose percussion was particularly hectic. But let's leave them in the streets, shall we? We are getting rather comfortable in our stuffy nooks, aren't we? Speaking of comfortable, might I suggest that as you drift towards the arms of sweet slumber, you imagine yourself back in time, managing an intricate dance with legions of disagreeable scents, all while dressed in layers of itchy fabric and juggling social niceties. It's a surprisingly effective lullaby when you recall your modern haven of cleanliness, a true portal into snoozeland. But here we must pause on our fragrant journey through history. There's always more to explore, more hidden layers to uncover, and as you nuzzle deeper into your pillows, think yourself lucky to be cozy in the here and now. Our next step wanders into another timeless room, but that's a lingering whisper for another moment. Sweet dreams, dear traveler, of worlds where noses are a little more fortunate. Imagine, if you will, stepping off a bustling, horse-drawn omnibus onto the cobblestones of a Victorian street. The clip-clop fades to a distant echo, and you're greeted by a tableau of brick-and-mortar homes, each like a chocolate box with varying degrees of frosting in the form of ornate moldings and gingerbread trim. The year is somewhere in the late 19th century, and if you snuggle past the stern decorum of tinted windows and lace curtains, we drift into a world where a myriad of smells greets our curious senses. As you stroll along the damp street, sporting a top hat or perhaps even a bonnet if your imagination allows, your nose witnesses a symphony of scent, each note more cacophonous than the last. There's a common misconception that Victorian times were politely scented, like lavender and rose, thanks to all those floral oil lamps and sachets stashed strategically within corsets. But oh dear listener, imagine peeling away the more pungent layer of this historical onion. Look up and notice the mushrooming chimneys huffing out the robust aroma of coal smoke. As the heart of Victorian industry, coal was as essential as bread and butter, albeit with a slightly earthier aroma that clung to every surface like an overzealous hug from your great-aunt Nellie. Yet, despite its ubiquity, there was no shortage of ironic complaints about soot-based snowflakes settling on Sunday bests, hanging out to dry. And what smells you won't find polite enough to knock at the nostrils door next? Ah, yes. From underneath the asphalt, Victorian street vendors peddled hot chestnuts, and bustling bakeries coaxed passers-by into wafting clouds of freshly baked bread. These comforting scents acted like air fresheners, attempting heroic, albeit futile efforts to mask the more authentic essence of the age, the perfume of proximity of people to horses. Without any sophisticated sewerage system, pre-Peterborough flush, and the ubiquitous presence of animal transport, the streets doubled up as playgrounds for smells no amount of lavender pomade could compete with. Now, as if that weren't enough to render a stiff upper lip quivering, let us tiptoe indoors. Imagine the grand hallways cloaked not only in dramatic wallpaper, but also quite possibly damp with that distinct aroma reminiscent of wet dog and boiled cabbage. You see, while Victorian homes may have dressed themselves in their Sunday best, they were also not designed with the utmost attention to ventilation. Thus, the very layers of drapery and carpeting meant to exhibit opulence worked diligently to trap and whirl around smells like a dedicated waltzer at an endless ball. Speaking of balls, we can't forgive the also-important odor of history, the human odor. Without the luxury of modern deodorants or the concept of effective daily bathing, our 19th century counterparts swung their dance partners while glistening with a natural sheen only the times could permit. Thus, each twirl and curtsy was punctuated with nature's own eau de toilette, deservedly earning a place in the aromatic annals of the age. And should your slumber beckon for more musings on curiosities, tuck yourself back onto the cobbled pavement once more, where Victorian street noses could sniff out progress. Each innovation, from gaslighting that added both convenience and the gentle aroma of burnt something or other, to medicinal concoctions promising cures while delivering aromas stronger than their benefits, painted its portion of a not-so-rosy but undeniably fascinating smellscape. As the evening mist mingles with the vestiges of another bustling day, you continue your metaphorical ramble through these richly detailed scenes. Dozing through their sensory tapestry, you've encountered a century that, while aromatic beyond floral illusions, hid its tale's truest essence beneath a veil of cultural perfumes. Find, dear dreamer of Victorian oddities, the slumbering solace in knowing there is always more to a history than meets, or indeed, sense, the eye. In the heart of Victorian England, living rooms doubled as maritime museums. Plush floral wallpapers filled with a faint sepia hue housed an array of curiosities. As fog rolled insistently from the River Thames outside their front doors, layers of cultural bric-a-brac cluttered the interiors. This was the golden age of stuff, and by stuff, we mean everything from fossilized beetles to seashell collections, all of which had a penchant for gathering both dust and, unnervingly, odors. Quite impressive, without modern ventilation, these rooms managed the miraculous feat of preserving smells like artifacts in their very own right. The scent cocktail was both perplexing and pronounced. Mix together a dash of stale cigar smoke, an accusing glare from last Sunday's mutton roast lingering in the crevices of heavy velvet drapery, and the faintest whisper of lavender sachets trying in vain to battle the army of odors. All this underpinned by a hint of coal, tinting the air like a gothic underfoot. You might be pondering why they didn't simply open a window. That's because our Victorian friends believed drafts, much like unintended social faux pas, could do the body great harm. They saw closed windows as fortresses keeping out the dangerous miasma of ill health. Ironically, their minds had built walls thicker than any London fog. Now step into their coziest corner, the kitchen where today's culinary conundrums would unravel. You might fancy this the heartbeat of the house, humming with the rustic charm of hearth cooking. Alas, when it comes to smellscapes, this reverie turns out to be more of an aromatic ambush. Herein brewed the bold symphony of Victorian dining, an extravaganza of scents, with everything from boiling cabbage to fish pies, showcasing their surprising lung capacity. Imagine the odoriferous antics of stewed turnips mingling with the perpetuity of smoked herring brine, tracing watercolor lines of scent through doorways and under ancient grandfather clocks. Such a state of affairs wasn't helped by the tendency to house a menagerie of pets, a veritable Noah's Ark of kittens, canaries, and perhaps a monkey from Uncle Arthur's jaunt to Ceylon. Each added its particular aromatic flair whilst presiding over stairs like tiny, judgmental deities of scent. But a true Victorian home wouldn't dare limit its olfactory enterprises to indoor restrictions. No, they engaged in the olfactory arts outdoors too, utilizing the wonders of the urban backyard. Amongst the carefully manicured rose bushes, the nightjar, more gloriously, the outdoor loo, existed. And oh, it was not at all clandestine about its presence. Each trip there was a commitment to courage, a journey worthy of its own episode of adventure, not to mention the occasional olfactory hurricane having its casual chat with your senses. Let us pause and explore this peculiar ritual of human resilience, bravely confronting the nightjar, where gazing at celestial stars above was more than philosophical. The stars were a hopeful diversion from the sturdy inquiries of one's senses below. It said, you could almost hear the sigh of relief upon returning indoors, despite the musty armchairs and decorative dust that awaited. Yet, despite all this, Victorian homes retained a belovedness, a warmth that transcended their occasionally dubious smells. Their fragrance tapestry wasn't just composed of the earthy and the pungent. It was woven with the scent of history itself, of a period plunged deep in discovery, innovation, and very vibrant personal expression. It was a world where a gentleman could go from drafting telegrams to supporting his lavender obsession without missing a beat. Their homes captured this spirit, bottling it, perhaps with a dainty lace stopper, so that the past could linger long enough for us to recount it comfortably nestled within our own modern, well-ventilated abodes. And so, as we reluctantly draw the blinds on today's aromatic exploration, we drift forward to ponder how those peculiar Victorians, with their blank stares in sepia-toned photographs, managed it all. We'll meander into new stories of unexpected delights, discovering how even their quirkiest ideas tiptoed into modernity. But that gentle ramble awaits us beyond the horizon, a tale for the night's next whisper. As the Victorian sun set behind a smoke-splattered horizon like an overzealous painter gone mad with charcoal, the streets of London lay quietly beneath a cloud of contradictions. Folks of the era were indeed innovators, thinkers, and inventors. Yet somehow, amidst their profound achievements, they had overlooked a central truth. Their homes often smelled like a blend of wet dog, cabbage, and faint desperation. This evening's exploration into the olfactory adventures of the Victorians brings us to the well-intentioned but somewhat misjudged attempt at floral redemption, the potpourri. Yes, potpourri, those decorative dried floral arrangements meant to mask odors and, incidentally, invoke the sensation of being struck by a rose-scented brick. Upon entering a Victorian parlor, one might be met by sweetly suffocating waves of lavender, rose petals, and whatever good intentions could be boiled and bottled. It was the era's olfactory armchair, the one you sink into whether you want to or not. In truth, while some truly enjoyed this aromatic bombardment, potpourri had to work extraordinarily hard against a mighty adversary. Picture, if you will, grand homes, bedecked with dense drapery, thick carpets, and intricately upholstered furniture, a dust mite's dream house. Now add to this heady mix the curious Victorian predilection for taxidermy. Yes, those venerable parlors were often peopled by glassy-eyed mammals frozen in perpetuity. There is perhaps only so much a handful of dried petals can do when battling both the mighty musk of a disapproving moose and the whims of Mother Nature herself. Another curious obsession of the Victorian age was with sprouts, but not the Brussels variety, thank goodness, though they did make frequent and heralded appearances at dinner tables. No, we are speaking of the human variety, the sprouting of offspring who, having perfected the fine art of smudging chocolatey fingerprints upon polished surfaces, became tempestuously involved in the epitome of proper hygiene. Envision, if you will, children whose baths were marked events and whose pockets bore intriguing collections of murky obstacles to cleanliness, beetles, stones, and the occasional unidentifiable lump of adventure. It was a time when the average Victorian home revelled in its cacophony of scent. Kitchens were epicenters for the great culinary experiments of the day, where bubbling stews or slowly roasting meats contributed to an ambient aroma. a dramatic backdrop for the spirited debates over whether the window should remain slightly ajar. This, of course, did not take into account the surprising olfactory delight of coal fires, always eager to remind residents of their presence by inexplicably invading their wardrobe without their leave. Yet, strangely, there existed a sense of comfort in these qualities. The sweet smell of life at its most flavorful, with a sprinkle of intrigue atop a persistent undertone of reality. Here, in a world unapologetically embracing the chaos of its existence, there was warmth. After all, imperfections often make the most striking portraits. Our gentle detour down this fragrant lane leads us slowly to the artful eccentricity of the eau de toilette, or lack thereof. Of course, the more daring considered such products a charming extravagance, a friendly visitor to the toilette family, though not a resident member. However, it is this very hodgepodge of scents and sensibilities that bestows upon each Victorian abode its timeless identity, not unlike one's favorite, slightly crumpled and immeasurably beloved tome that wafts of ink shenanigans and dog-eared dreams. In this nocturnal meander through the past, we bid adieu, for now, to these storied halls, knowing full well that there remain undiscovered corners shrouded in shadows, each whispering tales in the ambient murmur of time. As the evening deepens and sleep draws nearer, we shall leave the Victorians to their potpourri and procure a slumber of our own, cushioned by the soft comfort of knowing that there is nothing quite as perfect as imperfection itself. An intrepid sniff of the air, dear listener, and you might be misled into thinking that Victorian homes exclusively hosted clandestine cabbage festivals. It's true that the combination of coal smoke, dubious plumbing, and a perfumery of preservatives would cause any modern nostril to twitch. But fear not, we shall proceed gently into this aromatic abyss with congenial levity. Picture, if you will, the grand drawing room of a typical Victorian abode. The eye would be delighted by lush velvet drapes and the finest lace doilies, but the nose might beg to differ, declining entry altogether. You see, Victorian scent designers, who perhaps held the least enviable jobs, topped lavender with a dash, measured casually, of everything else. It wasn't so much a room freshener as it was an immersion in olfactory confusion. Tea, one might think, would offer sweet respite. Alas, the era's beloved beverage often carried the tang of tannins infused with several hopeful attempts at preserving leaves over long. Yet it was considered quite the social lubricant, and with tongues loosened by tannic trifles, discussions turned to the latest in Victorian wonders, the flushing toilet. A marvel it was, yet it must be said that this whirling triumph over nature hadn't quite mastered its mission of all-time olfactory obliteration. Ingenious though they were, Victorian toilets often operated more like water-powered aroma multipliers. The joy they inspired was matched only by the unplanned adventure of maintaining them, an unsophisticated symphony of gurgles, reminiscent of an operatic baritone agreeing disagreeably with a loud refrain. It was not unusual, then, for these merry tinkers of technology to transform homes into fragrant escapades. Wealthier homes, convinced of the merit of pipe-linked networks, inadvertently sponsored the creation of the first indoor river. But where? Nature might have blessed rivers with fish or lilies. These offered aroma poems of effluence. The more troubled of Victorian aristocracy, solicitors or actors rarely mentioned, accepted this humbling fate with a pinch of Earl Grey and a touch of humour, naturally. One might ask, what then of spices? Those darling blends that should have masked the mischief with symphonic sense. Dear listener, while spices were imported with vigour, the journey encountered unexpected dampness. Surviving with damp souls, the spices upon arrival resembled promises of masked mysteries rather than a pungent performance. The streets outside, if not indicative enough, exhibited a relish worthy of legend. Trampling through the cobblestones, horses and their accompanying carriages contributed heartily to the street scent competition. Hooves beat rhythmically, like percussionists driven passionately by passion fruit, though alas, sans the fruit part. The street sweepers, valuable members of this fragrant society, did little to stop the sun-drenched fusion of rustic rurality melding with alleged autumn breezes. That said, a good Victorian knew the power of fragrance layering. They applied solutions of desperation, perfumes concocted with the tenacity of explorers and the delicate grace of an elephant at a tea party. Scents named after gardens, blooms long forgetful of their own identities, sought to appease the air with the unyielding promise of musk. As society clung to their sweet-smelling salvation, this newfound industry of perfumes flourished, a triumphant bloom amidst the challenging anti-parfums of the environment. But beware, for our journey of exploration circles back with slow inevitability to the hearth, where fictional warmth and cheer lived side by side with smoke and soot. A roaring fire, a glowing beacon, instilled nostrils with robust optimism and no small degree of detainment. Here, the air was ripe with ash and ambition, gently whispering tales of fortitude, drawing not fear, but reverence for warm evenings shared in the company of cherished companions and complexities unfathomable. And so, with these aromatic adventures tucked into our collective memory, we waft gently onward. Take with you a fondness for the ebb and flow of Victorian air and the understanding that perhaps petticoats and pickled onions, though best enjoyed separately, bear secrets enough for future whispers. Sleep on, and we shall flow seamlessly into those tales yet to be told. As the gaslights flickered gracefully against the backdrop of the Victorian skyline, we find ourselves whisked away to an era where homes had the peculiar habit of seizing control of your olfactory senses in ways you could never quite anticipate. You see, dear listener, the Victorians, bless their hearts, had a colourful relationship with cleanliness, or its palpable absence. It wasn't that Victorians didn't appreciate the finer things. On the contrary, they adored opulence, with parlours cluttered with fussy frills and velvet draperies, steadfastly determined to collect every particle of grime floating gracelessly through the air. But, as any good mystery reveals, their real pièce de résistance lay hidden beneath the prim veneer, a symphony of scents that would make even the plumage of a peacock shy in comparison. Let us saunter through the hallowed halls of the average Victorian abode, where indoor plumbing was less of an invented convenience and more of an elusive unicorn riding atop a rainbow. In this era, chamber pots nestled snugly beneath beds, their presence a testament to proximity over nostril-pleasing arrangements. As the lady of the house awoke to her daily rituals, she was greeted by an olfactory ensemble that Beethoven himself would envy, for these homes indeed composed the symphonies of life, played by the most untuned orchestra of pots and pipes. The kitchens, too, presented an aromatic tapestry to those daring enough to entertain a meal, stewy within. Cooks bustled about, their culinary masterpieces somehow entangled amidst the essence of simmering cabbage, a smell that, once encountered, carved a niche in the sensory experience of the unprepared visitor. This pungent air was hardly one-dimensional. It danced in harmony with the yeasty perfume of freshly baked bread, painting a paradox of warm comfort and earthy tang. Weaving our way through these lively passages, one could scarcely ignore the adventure of laundry day. This was a grand spectacle, involving an impressive array of soap shavings that were as hard to grasp as the concept of sanitation itself. Clotheslines, like obedient soldiers, bore garments heavy with the scent of human existence and wet terry cloth. And let us not forget the scrubbing boards, sturdy and unforgiving, each scrape against fabric echoing a desire to cleanse body and soul, yet never quite overwhelming the tenacious, lingering whispers of perspiration. Indeed, as Victorian ingenuity sought to tackle the era's fragrant infamy, many a book and pamphlet promised remedies to ebb this tide of aroma. Ever the resourceful folk, they concocted foul potpourri disguised as miraculous solutions, slyly convincing the populace to embrace new-fangled potions. Of course, these dilutions had all the effect of a feather attempting to sober a tipsy elephant. To make matters even more engaging, the genteel art of patronizing the highly esteemed perfume industries emerged as a societal standard. With a beguiling mixture of rosewater and musk, Victorians wielded their olfactory swords to combat what later became fondly termed eau de Edwardian Street. Adorning oneself with these enchanting essences became an equalizer, unsparingly applied in a valiant attempt to shroud everyday odors in fragrant mystery, much like dressing a hedgehog in crinoline. Imagine now the chaos ensuing upon receiving unexpected guests. Bastions of humble hospitality that they were, hosts often resorted to the strategic dispersal of a coal-fired bouquet. Though not particularly adept at vanquishing the beast of domestic aroma, this technique offered what some might consider a mildly refreshing mask, a reassertion of control amidst the otherwise anarchic congregation of scents. As our nostalgic meander through this quixotic olfactory landscape reaches its twilight, we find ourselves pausing under the great oak beams of a Victorian ceiling. Here lies the threshold of yet another captivating chapter, where innovations of the time reveal their own quirks and charms, a gentle invitation to explore a world shaped by the wondrous contradictions of these fantastical Victorian havens. And so, dear listener, allow your mind to wander like an errant breeze as we prepare to drift further into the soothing embrace of our tale. In the velvety embrace of Victorian evenings, where gas lamps flickered over cobblestone streets and opulent parlours, one could often find a peculiar olfactory tapestry woven into the very fabric of daily life. A curious blend of odours, both intentional and uninvited, wafted through homes that would be the envy of modern-day perfumers interested in grotesque undertones. As the candlelight danced on the walls, the air itself seemed to conduct a symphony of scents, each telling a tale of its own. Imagine, if you will, the ritualistic daily affair that was the bathing procedure of a typical Victorian household. With bathtubs that were more a suggestion than a comfortable vessel, residents bathed in water shared like neighborhood gossip, heated over a crackling fire, laced with the oils and scents of the day. Lavender for the wealthy, vinegar for the thrifty, and rosewater if you fancied yourself a romantic. But this bathing was a sporadic event, often reserved for Sundays or special occasions, like preparing for a courtship walk or an inquisitive visit from a distant aunt. Then there was the household pet, whose contributions were both visual and sensual in nature. Cats lounging with the aloof authority of aristocrats, and dogs who trotted with cheerful abandon, trailing the scent of earth and mischief. In the kitchen, the happy clucking of a resident hen or two came not only with a suggestion of breakfast, but their own rural perfume, mixed delightfully with the odor of stewing cabbage. Always stewing cabbage. But my dear listener, the real troubadour of the Victorian home aroma symphony was none other than the coal. Coal dust was as ubiquitous as ironic Pinterest quotes in today's digital age, infiltrating the very sinews of existence with its signature earthy tang. It was a practical choice, heating homes against the damp London fog or the cruel bite of a country winter, playing a fundamental role not only in the temperature, but in the permeating bouquet that lingered in heavy curtains and regal drapery. As evening descended, the lighting of the fire would commence with a billow of smoke that tasted of warmth and antiquity, leaving blackened traces on the mantel and the occasional sooty smudge on a hastily dusted shelf. The smell of burning coal, accentuated by the acrid finery of phosphor from the matches, engaged in a nightly waltz of sorts, twirling the aroma through the household until every corner felt as if it had known coal since the dawn of time. And let us not forget the grand affair of candle making. Candles, those pillars of light and civilization, were made from tallow, rendered fat, primarily from sheep or cows. As afternoon shadows moved through the Victorian rooms, candles were poured and set, their manufacture a curious blend of soap-making and alchemy. Only in the final product did the nose discern the vaguely meaty undertone lurking beneath the floral chaos of added lavender or violet. Each flicker of flame whispered stories of where it had been, perhaps the woolly hills of Yorkshire, or the bustling markets of London, stitched into the nightly air like a memory sewn into a favourite quilt. Thus, as we turn from the musings of Victorian sensory delight, picture those homes, now shadows against the gaslight skyline, settling into the night. Fabrics loom heavy with the weight of the day's stories, fragrances entwined with the elegance and absurdity of an era devoted to both excess and frugality in equal measure. In the delicate twilight of this dreamy narrative, we find ourselves shuttering the windows on this chapter, pondering just where these scent adventures might lead us next. Perhaps, when the next evening arrives with its whispered secrets and silken shadows, we'll turn to the kitchens or the gardens, where even more aromatic stories lie in wait. For now, let the scents linger in your imagination as you drift deeper into the embrace of history, soothed by the melodies of centuries past. Picture, if you will, a Victorian home, its walls 2 centuries old, creaking like a great-grandmother's knees on a cold winter's morning. The fireplaces flicker dimly, casting shadows of poise or haunting spectres, depending on one's imagination and perhaps the amount of cheese consumed at supper. In this murmur-filled abode, where scents both pleasant and peculiar linger like an indecisive guest, we find ourselves stepping silently through the aroma-laden corridors of the past. Imagine now the grandiose drawing room, where the air is thick with a bouquet of unexpected fragrances. Here, one might detect the subtle undertones of lavender brought in by optimistic housekeepers in a futile effort to combat the more persistent olfactory assaults of life. Listen closely, and you may hear the faint whisper of an old armchair, no doubt plotting its next escapade with a cloud of dust. But what is that mixed with the lavender? A touch of irony, perhaps, as the odor of damp coal mingles like an uninvited guest. Victorians were, after all, enthusiastic users of coal. Every household had its fair share of coal dust, settling like a fine, grimy snow over surfaces, infiltrating the very pores of the wallpaper like an unwanted acquaintance that's particularly hard to shed. As you amble through the dining room, imagine the olfactory echo of dinners long past, those grand, multi-course feasts served with an aromatic backdrop of game meats and mystery dishes, often laid to rest under silver cloches. The brave souls who dined here required a stalwart constitution, for the culinary concoctions held potent, lingering scents not easily subdued. Let us not forget the inevitable and rather too frequent odor of overboiled cabbage, a staple in the Victorian olfactory oeuvre. Here, in this labyrinth of smells, the kitchen stands not just as the heart of the home, but perhaps the lungs too. A curious blend of yeast and fresh bakes, like a bakery after a slightly exciting explosion, permeates the air. Scorch marks around the stovetop tell tales of the grand culinary adventures executed by cooks armed with little more than cast iron pans and courage. Yet, juxtaposed with these delightful fragrances is the ever-present hint of soot, a constant reminder of the era's coal dependency and the intricate dance of ventilation systems that manage to be both marvelously complex and marginally effective. One mustn't forget the cherished pastimes, like a gentleman's after-dinner pipe smoke, a robust perfume trailing through parlors and study rooms. Those rich, woody wisps linger as testament to the post-prandial musings of moustached philosophers and poets recreating the world over brandy snifters and earnest debate. Even the family library held the aroma of adventures, bound in leather and ink, with just a hint of mildew, adding to the air of intellectual mystery. Upstairs, the bedrooms carried their own unique bouquet, a blend of linens aired inadequately on equally inadequate days, and perfumes hastily applied, filling the rooms with floral notes, struggling under the weight of their own heaviness. And yet, beneath this fragrant rhapsody lay the persistent reminder of chamber pots, an element of Victorian practicality that nostalgia conveniently airbrushes into non-existence. Taking a final stroll through the garden, the gentle fragrance of roses and freshly mown grass offers redemption from traditional contrivances, a neat trick pulled off by nature herself to soothe senses weary from the paraphernalia of domestic life, a kind of olfactory oasis in a veritable desert of smells. As the moon gently illuminates these historical fragrances, it reminds us that even such a lavishly supplied sensory experience must eventually fade into dreamland, where the whispers of the past continue to unfold their stories. And so, we pause, pausing at the threshold of another chapter, as you find yourself drifting into the tranquility of sleep, cozy and wrapped in the softly murmured nostalgia of all you've smelt and beheld. As we tiptoe into the penultimate chapter of our aromatic Victorian journey, close your eyes and imagine, if you will, the spirit of a London afternoon, foggy with a side of soot. Picture yourself in a cozy parlour, the kind with crooked floors and chairs embroidered in shades that only a moth could admire. Feel the flicker of candles casting whimsical, shadowy dances on the walls as we unravel more of the olfactory wonders hidden within the peculiar realm of the 19th century. Now, turn your nose, dear listener, to the venerable bouquet of the Victorians' laundry day, a most heroic endeavour where mischievous odours found their home in undergarments stiffened with adventure, and adventure alone. Mondays were wash days, a fact as reliable as a Victorian child's indulgence in a game of leapfrog. Pity the soul who misjudged the alignment of these two phenomena, a reckless choice only slightly less smelly than thinking the Thames was swimmable. The scene opens with a determined brigade of women wielding washboards as their preferred weapon of choice against the Zeusing week's accumulated filth. It was a battle involving caustic lies and soaps strong enough to strip even the most stubborn of sins, or at least coax some respectability back into Edward's trousers. Add your dash of zealous scrubbing and a peal of laughter sharp enough to cut through any soap suds, and the result was clothes that bore the likeness of a well-loved wash rag. Beyond this musical melee, there's a delightful little device known as the mangle, resembling an industrial-grade, house-sized pasta maker. It conspired, often successfully, to turn sopping garments into something resembling the dried sheets Victorian poets waxed lyrical about. Yet, its success was never a given. More often, garments emerged looking disconcertingly similar to the wrung-out regrets of an ill-fated laundry queue. Having thus emerged triumphant, this Herculean laundry would proceed to dry, not on lines in gardens buoyed by warm and forgiving winds, but crammed into smoky kitchens or overworked camp parlours. And there, bathing in the fumes of coal smoke and meat pies, these victors of laundry day would absorb that persistent fragrance of domesticity, a subtle blend of hope, despair, and the faintest whiff of soot, topped with the gentle undercurrents of wet dog. Oh, but what of the men, you may muse? Was their contribution simply in the abundant creation of said dirty garments? Ah, not quite, as many a gentleman of the era had his love affair with the cutting-edge contraption known as the automatic collar ironer, a marvellous setting of Heath Robinson-esque comedy. One might imagine a vague reenactment of an unconvincing circus act, steam hissing away and collars piously obeying their pressing. If timed wrongly, however, the starched item turned into a perfect slice of cardboard, prepared to wage an inevitable rebellion against its owner's neck. Completing this olfactory symphony, dear dreamer, was the undeniable Victorian desire to chase away these persistent smells with perfumes that abandoned subtlety at the drawing-room door. Patchouli, rosewater, and eau d'industrial revolution, all diligently applied in quantities that could drown an unsuspecting narwhal. Their scents, a daring counterpoint to any remnants of the washing day saga, wove a tapestry of aromas the Hudson River would have been envious of. As the ladies and gentlemen retired for the evening, serenaded by the persistent shriek of discontented plumbing, a heavenly chorus of pipes, if ever there was one, a gentle calm would settle upon their world. Oh yes, a twilight embrace marked by the familiar cadence of street vendors peddling freshly fried chestnuts, and nearby a horseclip clopping, its own aroma subtly mingling with the city's afterglow. And so, as the great city sighed its night blue sigh, welcoming the moon's pale vigil, we too shall rest our minds and prepare to drift into the misty narratives of tomorrow. Our tale is not yet done, dear listener, for one last chapter awaits, guiding us gently to the whiskers of dreams, and the true end of our Victorian voyage. Feel free to let the weight of the day slip quietly into the warm, welcoming embrace of sleep, as the soft echoes of a bygone world whisper stories to your heart, as the curtain gently falls upon our exploration of why Victorian homes reigned supreme in the realm of extraordinary odours. We find ourselves nestled in a snug living room, circa 1893. It's a place where the air is as thick as a Dickensian plot, and every breath you take carries with it the whimsy of another time, when notions of hygiene danced a two-step behind the march of progress. Around us, the Victorian home is an artful collage of peculiarities, not unlike a cup of sleepy-time tea brewed with a dash of narrative eccentricity. Each knick-knack whispers tales of yesteryear, as if the shadow of history itself has settled here, content to lounge upon the tufted, velvet settee. The overwhelming tapestry of aromas doesn't just waft. It pirouettes through the room, intertwining the scents of coal dust and rosewater with just a hint of mothball exasperation. In this era of aromatic abundance, when Queen Victoria herself might have smiled secretly at the audacity of calling such a mélange homey, the very walls seem to exhale the heartiest of olfactory greetings. Take a moment to let your imagination wander through those elaborate hallways, adorned with patterns so intricate, even the wallpaper seems on the verge of tears from exhaustion. Here, the mingling aroma from the dinner cart, roast beef perhaps, triumphant in its third serving, and cabbage, ever the loyal sidekick, is joined by the bold embrace of kerosene lamps, whose dim glow is rivaled only by the flicker of truths they illuminate. Such was the Victorian flair, adding notes of candle wax and unpredictably perfumed servants to their symphony of scent. The loyal housemaid's uniform may have been starched to an etiquette-approved stiffness, but her lavender sachets persistently whispered to visitors a promise of florally adventurous dreams. And who could forget the brilliant innovations of the era? The advent of indoor plumbing, which at best was a noble effort at practicality, but at worst was a slapdash invitation for sewer-souls to join the soiree. Imagine the charismatic presence of the water closet, not just a room, but a rite of passage for household smells, launching odorous whiffs through pipes with unpredictable charisma. Then there were the gentlemen's parlours, perfect for ruminating over the latest beard grooming oils and pomades that promised, and indeed delivered, to leave one's moustache redolent long after the evening's discussions on imperial expansion ceased. In this fragrant fantasia, each scent told a story. It was a time when society might have been puzzled over invisible germs, but delighted visibly at the grandeur of smells that danced between every corset rib and top hat. There were balls where perfumes waged olfactory battles across ballroom floors, cloves clashing with patchouli, while the dancers elegantly twirled, knowingly or not, through an invisible odyssey. And so, as we bid farewell to this aromatic escapade through Victorian homesteads, let us raise an imaginary cup to the legacy of smells that, despite their jesting charms, urged the world forward into the even more perfumed embrace of modernity. Now, dear traveller of times gone by, as your eyes grow heavier and your breath softer, let the quiet lull of history cradle you into the hands of sleep. With a nod to the fragrances of the past that linger playfully in our dreams, we gently close the pages on this chapter and, however sleepily, meditate on the curious delight that comes from knowing our historical forebears were, if nothing else, savouring scents even in their slumber. May your dreams be as layered and whimsically rich as the Victorian air, perfumed with knowledge and a sprinkle of the past's delightful absurdities. Good night.